I'm going to speak to you tonight about Israel's greatest and most neglected sin. It's a sin that nobody in the churches will talk about. It's found in Revelation chapter 2 and verse 14, among many other verses, where it says, "But I have a few things against thee," this is Jesus Christ speaking to the church, "because thou hast there them that hold the doctrine of Balaam." You know, I've been a preacher for many years. I surrendered at 16, and I'm now going to be 79, so I don't know how you subtract that, but that's about 60 years or more. And it wasn't until probably sometime last year that I even knew what the doctrine of Balaam was all about. Never even thought about it until I began to study it. I've spoken today about the need for the law because sin is a transgression of the law. There's one law and one sin that never gets talked about, and my question is why? Why is this subject avoided? It is stated by Jesus as being the doctrine of Balaam. It's found in the references of the Bible as refer to the Nicolaitans and reference to Jezebel. We have mentioned Elijah in the past and his 450 prophets of Baal that he went up to the mountain. And I never thought about this much until I studied it. He went up and fought 450 Baal prophets, but they didn't do anything for the 400 that sat at Jezebel's table. So there were 850 Baal prophets against one man of God. And God saw his prophet win.
Hallelujah.
Today, the majority of those who call themselves pastors refuse to talk about this doctrine, the doctrine of Balaam. Jesus immediately refers this matter back to the Old Testament. If you're going to understand the doctrine of Balaam, you have to read the history of Balaam. And we find it in the Old Testament. The doctrine of Balaam deals with the subject of fornication. I am appalled at the many preachers who have little study. This is my greatest complaint about living in redneck country in South Missouri, is we've got preacher after preacher after preacher who decide one day that they want to become a preacher. And they've never gone to school, they've never studied the original languages, they've never looked at the history of the church and of the gospel of Jesus Christ. They've never studied the history of Israel, and they get their sermon outline out of some book, and then they'll preach it, go home and enjoy their bologna sandwiches and go hunting or whatever else they want to do. There was years ago, there was so many, this is a story, but there was a man that wanted to be a preacher, and they were going to ordain him. They had him up here, and they were asking him, "Tell us about your call to the ministry." He said, "Well, sure." He said, "I prayed out behind the barn every morning. And I was out praying one morning, and I heard God talk to me and tell me to go preach." They said, "You heard the voice of God?" "Yes, I did." They said, "Well, how did it sound?" "It sounded like this." "Go preach." "Go preach." It was a mule. I've got a man who lives across from me, and they're wonderful people. He's been a pastor and a mortician for many years. When I first moved there several years ago, I invited him over for coffee, and I said, "Here's my library." I had 10,000 volumes in my library at that time. And I said, "Anytime you want to come over and study or do some research." And he said, "Oh, brother," he said, "I only read about one book a year," he says. "That's about all I do." That's what we have. And they're standing in the pulpits, and they're talking about things they have no idea what they're talking about. It's about fornication and whoring after false gods. Israel is described as being a whore when worshiping strange gods. The problem is that pastors and theologians today do not tie the event pay attention, do not tie the event preceding the open worship of false gods to the story. There is an event that takes place every single time in the scriptures before false prophets and false gods. And that is sexual relationships with people of different races.
Right.
In fact, in Corinthians, we misquote a passage. We don't use the right words. Paul said, "Come ye out." And we use that verse so many times, and I preached on it when I was in my ignorant years, just like all the other pastors. "Come ye out, therefore, and be ye separate, and touch not the unclean thing." The word is not thing. In all the preceding verses, he's talking about unclean people, meaning other races. "Come ye out, therefore, and touch not the unclean people." And yet we throw them in the same classroom. We put them in the same Sunday school class. We mix them where did we get the idea that we could mix our little kids with every kind of person, and they would grow up knowing they should be separate?
Amen.
When a man and woman have their first sex, they become one. That woman and that man are now spiritually tied together. Because they are not covenant people, because their God is not our God, when you have an interracial sexual and marriage, and by the way, the word interracial marriage is an oxymoron.
Yeah.
God is not in the business of forming covenant marriages with people who cannot even have a covenant. So when you have an Israelite who wants to marry a non-Israelite, you're asking God to make a covenant with people who cannot have a covenant. But they are bound spiritually. That's why Paul told believers and unbelievers in Israel not to separate or divorce over the issue of unbelief if they were married within the Adamic race. Chapter 7 of, I believe it's 1 Corinthians, when they wrote him and they said, well, we're Israelites and we believe, but I'm a woman and I'm married to a husband and he's an unbeliever. Didn't say he was not an Israelite. And she said, should I separate from him? And Paul said, no. Pay attention to what Paul says. And he said this about the men too. He said, don't separate from them, because it is by you that he is sanctified and your children are sanctified. Why do you think Hosea and Amos said when the Lord scattered the 10 tribes that he might increase his harvest? Because he knew when his Israelite covenant people married into the Adamic race who were spirit people, that they would be brought in to the covenant.
Yes.
That's how he did it. Other races believe in and worship and serve other gods. I remember when I was holding Bible classes in prison, and we had black folks that came, black men came to the class. And I was teaching in Genesis, and I was trying not to offend anybody. I didn't know how not to offend. I didn't want to just come out and say, Adam's a white man. You know, I was trying to figure out how to do it, and I was kind of stumbling around. And there was a black fellow out there, and he said, Reverend, he said, go ahead and tell him the truth. Adam was white. We were here 10,000 years before he was anyway. Next morning, the guy, I was out doing my walk around the yard. Well, they had a track, like where you run on a track. And I was doing my little jogging, trying to stay in shape. And boy, here he comes running. He says, hey, good morning, Reverend. How you doing? I said, I'm doing fine. He said, don't get all bent out of shape. Said, we know what the truth is. Just keep on teaching. So I kind of got a little more brave than that. Jesus described the actions in the verse above as a stumbling block. He said Balaam put a stumbling block in front of Israel. Let me say that again. Interracial sex in marriage is the worship of false gods. Say it again. The interracial sex and marriage, so to speak, is the worship of a false god, even if you don't go bow down at an idol. Because you are covenanting yourself with a person who is a false god worshiper. The cherished multiracial concept and the multicultural ideas might have to go down the drain if we read the scriptures. We might just have to pull the plug on them. The book of Revelation is not the only book that talks about Baal Peor. Jude says they are strange flesh. He said it's an error. Peter describes it as teaching a false prophets being damnable heresies. Now, I don't know about you, but if Jesus is telling it's a damnable heresy, I think we ought to listen if we're going to be damned for it. Jude claims that these teachers speak evil things which they know not after the error of Balaam. They do not know they are teaching error many times. This is a minor doctrine because Balaam appears by name 60 times through the Bible. To be damned for holding the doctrine of Balaam is not a small matter. Well, what is the Balaam doctrine? Let's look at it. The story is very simple. There was a man who was king, King Balak. He was king of a nation, and he hired, or the king hired Balak to curse the children of Israel. And he went and got Balaam. He had Balaam to come. Balaam was a prophet, but he was not a prophet of God that I can see. I've not found that in the scripture. And the king sent him and said, behold, these captured Moabite women caused the children of Israel through the counsel of Balaam to commit trespass against the Lord in the matter of Peor. In the first instance, Balaam was hired to curse Israel, and God prevented him from doing so. How did he do it? Now, you preachers can straighten me out if you like. But you know, Balaam went up on the high place and he opened his mouth to curse Israel. And out came a blessing. I've always said we ought to learn to pray imprecatory prayers against the preachers of America. And we ought to say, God, next Sunday when all the preachers get up and they want to say anything about multiculturalism and interracial is okay, just tell the truth.
That's good.
What would people do if all of a sudden all the preachers in America one Sunday just said, we can't do this anymore? I think it's a good idea. I've been praying for it to happen for a long time. But he was hired to curse them, and he couldn't. Balaam counseled Moab to use their women to entice the men through sex to come to their homes and their feasts and to eventually would worship their God. Balaam said, I can't curse them. But if you want God to curse them, then you get their women to entice them over into a sexual relationship and take them to the feast. And when they eat the food that's sacrificed to idols and worship them, that God will intervene and He will destroy them. In Numbers 25:1, and Israel abode in Shittim, and the people began to commit whoredom with the daughters of Moab, and they called the people unto the sacrifices of their gods, and the people did eat and bowed down to their gods. That's why Joshua said, I wouldn't pay any attention to Balaam. I wouldn't listen to their women. Shall we then hearken unto you to do this great evil, to transgress against our God in marrying strange wives? Nehemiah said. The word strange in the Old Testament, there are 8 Hebrew words for stranger or strange. What was the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah? Now, stop and think about this. What happens to Lot's wife? She turned into salt, right? You remember Abraham and Lot? They were fussing about the land. They had too many cattle and all that. Abraham said, you take what you want and I'll take what's left. And he said, I'll go down to Sodom and Gomorrah. Were there any Israelites in Sodom and Gomorrah? No. Who were they? They were Canaanites. Well, that's interesting because Lot married one of them. That's why his wife was turned into salt. That's why she loved Nineveh and Sodom and Gomorrah. That's why she loved all the wickedness of that area, is because she was one of them. And their girls were half-breeds. That's why they got their dad drunk and slept with him and got pregnant so they could have some kids. And when they did, they had Moab and Ammon. And God said, these 2 boys and their descendants shall never, ever, never enter the tabernacle of the people of Israel. Oh, I thought God loved everybody. There's 7 words that for strangers, and 2 of them that mean they're not of the Adamic race. One is Nokriy, and one is Zuwur. And if you'll read those verses where those words are used, they're always warnings. Don't let them eat of the sacrifice. Don't let them come to the gate of the tabernacle. Don't let them mix in. Don't let them come and be a part of. Don't. God was so distressed that he said, oh, my people, what have I done unto you? And wherein have I wearied you? If I've wronged you, he says, testify against me. God warns Israel, they have dealt treacherously against the Lord, for they have begotten strange children. Let me tell you something, folks. In America, Israel is producing a lot of strange children. And I'm telling you, there's a day of reckoning going to come when this is going to be cleaned up. And the Lord said, now shall a month devour them, a short time. Micah 6:5, oh, my people, remember how that Balak, king of Moab, consulted, and what Balaam the son of Beor answered, that ye might know the righteousness of the Lord. Micah 6:16, for the statutes of Omri are kept. That's it. They intermixed with all those foreigners, and they allowed a foreign king by the name of Omri, and he brought in foreign law. That's where we are in America. We have gone away from the law of God to the law of man, the law of Omri, to accommodate the people who are not covenant people. Peter says it is forsaking the right way and are going astray, following the way of Balaam, the son of Bozar, who loved the wages of unrighteousness. The prophecies of Micah concern the children of Israel and shows the elect remnant that is to be gathered from Israel only at the end of this age. It is still the children of Israel, and it's not a multiracial church. The other nations go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the word of the Lord. Somebody was telling me about this today, if that was going to happen in the millennium, and I didn't have time to go into a long. I'm not a millennial person. So you know they have premillennial, postmillennial, amillennial. And somebody asked me, what are you? And I said, I'm non-millennial. I don't think the Lord's going to have 1,000 years of anything where he reigns. I think he reigns all the time. Balaam knew that no man could curse the nation of Israel because there is no enchantment against Israel. But he also knew that God would judge Israel if he would tell them to cause the women to go over and get the men seduced so that they would worship these other gods. Do you know it's strange to me that they're under various racial vilification laws of one form or another, it's illegal to espouse anything to the contrary other than multiculturalism in most of the Anglo-Saxon world. Notice that it is not illegal anywhere else. Not in Asia, not in India, not in the Middle East, not in Russia, not in Europe. Only illegal to do what we're doing in the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. Why? Because that's where God's people live. Jesus says, I have this against you. I have this against you. Repent, or else I will come against you quickly. Let's look at the New Testament about fornication. 1 Corinthians 10:8. Neither let us commit fornication as some of them committed and fell in one day 23,000. Do you know what happened with Baal Peor? Whenever they sinned and they lived in fornication with those Moabite women and they worshiped their God, God came in and killed 23,000 of them. And over in the New Testament, they always referred back to that time. This is about the worship of Baal Peor. This refers us once again to Balaam's advice. Although Paul does not use Balaam's name, he talks about the event. In 1 Corinthians 10:11, now all these things happen unto them for ensamples, and they are written for our admonition. In other words, folks, we ought to pay attention. We are to accept admonishment in this example or not. Paul shows that this is a common temptation for all of Israelites to whom he is writing. At this point, it's necessary to remind you that there is an unfortunate word in the Bible called Gentile. Do you know where the word Gentile came from? It's not in the Bible, really.
How are you?
The word Gentile came from the Roman Church. You see, in the Old Testament, the Old Covenant, everybody knew that God had a covenant with Israel. And everybody else that was outside, they were considered the nations, which they also called genitalia, or Gentiles. And the Roman Church, though, came along and said, well, you know, they're not talking about Israel the same way, and so we're going to have the doctrine that if you're a part of the Roman Church, that's Israel. And everybody outside the Roman Church, that's the Gentile. And when our translators came along, they took that same word out of the Latin and brought it over into the King James Bible, and they're saying everybody who is not a Jew is a Gentile. But you know who the Gentiles were in most of the New Testament writings? They were the 10 tribes of Israel. One of the things we wrestle with is over in Galatians and Ephesians, where it says there is a wall of separation. Jesus has come to break down the wall of separation between Judah and the house of Israel. But they don't say it that way. They say between the house of Judah, or the Jews, and the Gentiles. And so you got Baptist preachers who are saying that Jesus came and broke down the wall between the special covenant people and Gentiles. Anybody can be an Israelite. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is now the sons of Israel, or the children of Israel, can be adopted as sons or placed as sons inside of the covenant again, and the house of Judah and the house of Israel are reunited. How many of you, let's see, how do I want to ask? I'll give you an illustration. Years ago, back in the 80s, I traveled all over the country and outside the country. I preached it 800 times in many churches in every state. And I was in Detroit, and this fellow picked me up. And he said, I am a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin. And I had just come into this message barely, but I knew that wasn't right. And I looked at him and I said, how do you know? He said, well, my heritage says I'm a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin. I said, well, you know, Paul, he said he was of the tribe of Benjamin, but he was an Israelite. He didn't say he was a Jew. And this gentleman said, well, same thing. I said, no, it's not the same thing. That was the end of it. He wasn't interested in hearing the rest of the story. But I want to ask you, if I were to ask you, do you know any Jews? Almost everybody in here would say, yes, I do. I know some Jews. But if we were to ask you, do you know anybody who's a member of the tribe of Judah, could you raise your hand? I can't. I don't know. Because they're integrated with the house of Israel. They're all together. They worship God. They believe in Christ. They've been born again. Their people are born from above. They're people who serve God. In response to the question about whether it was appropriate for a man to divorce his wife, Jesus answered, and I say unto you, whosoever putteth away his wife, except it be for fornication, and shall marry another, committeth adultery. And I've heard preachers use that passage to say, it's okay if a man has been unfaithful and a woman puts her husband away, that she can get married again. That's not what that passage is saying. That passage is saying, if your daughter marries somebody out of her race, she's not married. And she can put him away and marry the right guy. That's the only justification Jesus gave for divorce. And they practiced it in the book of Nehemiah and the book of Ezra. Ezra and Nehemiah came back to Jerusalem and they found that they had been intermarrying with the Moabites, and they had all these strange children. And the priests and the priests called the people together and they read the scriptures to them, and they bawled them out. They chewed them out and said, what are you doing? We got thrown into captivity because of this. And now you're going to do it again? What are you doing to us? And they said, you will take your wives and you will take them back home, and all their children, you will take them back home, and you will leave them. And if you won't do that, you will die this day. I wonder what would happen in America if God said to do that. The word for fornication is porneia. W. Vine says it's illicit sexual intercourse, metaphorically as the association of gods other than Yahweh. Not a very good definition. Thayer says the same thing. No spirit-bearing races serve other gods. Let me put it this way. What I was trying to say is those who bear no spirit, those who are not spirit bearers, serve other gods. And to have sex with them, or to move in with them, or to even have something called a piece of paper for a license, and you live together, that is fornication. Jude verse 11 says, woe unto them, for they have gone in the way of Cain, and ran greedily after the heir of Balaam for reward. For fornication will inherit, for no fornicator will inherit the kingdom of God. No fornicator will inherit the kingdom of God. no interracial people will enter the kingdom of God. That's what it's saying. Come ye out and be separate from them. Come ye out from among them and be ye separate, and touch not the unclean people. Be not unequally yoked. 2 Peter 2:15 indicates that people with this doctrine have gone astray. Jude 11 called holding it an error. Churches today try to make it acceptable. 2 Corinthians 6:17, wherefore come out from among them and be ye separate, and touch not the unclean people. John 8:41, be not born fornication, and we have one Father, even God. That's what the Jews said to Jesus. Jesus laid it on the line to them, replying that they were not Abraham's children, through Isaac, although they were Abraham's seed. These Edomites knew that Israelites were the children of God, and hence tried to claim descent from Abraham. They also knew that the pursuit of other gods was classified as fornication. Jesus said to them, I know that you are Abraham's seed, but you seek to kill me because my word has no place in you. Let me put it in a little better phrase as far as I'm concerned. This is okay. But he says that you seek to kill me because there is no place in you for my word. That's what he said. Acts 15:29, that you abstain from fornication. 1 Corinthians 6:13, the body is not for fornication. 1 Corinthians 6:18, flee fornication. Ephesians 5:3, but fornication let it not be once named among you. Colossians 3:5, mortify therefore fornication. 1 Thessalonians 4:3, for this is the will of God, even your sanctification, that ye should abstain from fornication. Who is the great advocate of racial intermarriage? Who has been the promoter? The Catholic Church, the Masons, the Illuminati. They're the biggest movers in this area. Whom can we blame for the problems related to multiculturalism practically in the Western world? You know what's interesting to me? The Muslims are not trying to pour over the Chinese border. They're not trying to pour into Vietnam. They're not trying to pour into India. They just want to be in the white Israelite nation. That's where they want to be. And the reason we have a problem is because we have the wrong message, the wrong goal, the wrong purpose. Because now we have church pastors who want to fill their churches with anybody that walks on two legs so they can have a big church. 2 Chronicles 20:20, believe in the Lord your God, so shall ye be established. Believe his prophets, so ye shall prosper. It's a hard saying that you cannot intermarry and that you cannot reach out to these people. It is a hard saying. We've had questions today that reveal that it's a hard saying. And like Brother Dave and others said, we want to be evangelistic. We want to be salvation. We want to provide the same things for them that we have. But we have not the right to offer to them things that God has not offered them. Can Balaam's doctrine apply today? Of course. Romans 9:20 and 21. Nay, but, O man, who art thou that repliest against God? Shall the thing formed say to him that formed it, why hast thou made me thus? Hath not the potter power over the clay of the same lump to make one vessel unto honor and another unto dishonor? I've had people say to me, well, Brother Ramsey, I can't serve a God who's partial. All I can say is, then you can't serve my God. If you can't let God be God, then you're not able to be one of his. That doesn't mean we have to hate those other people. We shouldn't. It even means we should help them. Somebody asked me the other day, What do you think about missionaries to Africa? I said I wouldn't send one to Africa if they're going to go down there and preach the gospel and tell them that they have a right to be a part of the covenant people. I wouldn't send them. But if somebody came to me and said, we're an engineering company and we want to go to Africa and drill a water well so they don't have to drink dirty water, and we want to help them to build sewers that they don't have to walk around in squalor, I might try to help that. I'm not against helping them, but I'm surely against trying to offer them the pearls of the covenant, which God said, don't throw your pearls before the swine. Now, I've had several people even here, and I've had many over the last year or so say, they come to me, and I told you about Brother McCurry. He did the same thing. He come and said, show me a verse in the Bible that says we're not supposed to intermarry. Can't do it. It's not found in one verse. It's found in many verses, and it's deductive. There's a difference in deductive and overt teaching. You know, thou shalt not have any other gods before thee, that's one thing. But when he talks about the interracial and the outside of our race togetherness, it has to do with the covenant. It has to do with who's the elect, who God chose. And he didn't choose them. What I want you to do, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, because there are many of us in this room that would have to raise our, I'm saying our, hand. And I'm very sad I have to include me in that. But probably if I ask tonight how many of you have a relative that is either dating or married somebody outside their race, there'd probably be many hands in this room go up. Mine would. I'm grieved many times because I have a granddaughter who's dating a black guy, and she's beautiful. She's a nurse. She's educated. She was homeschooled. She was home birthed. But she was in a church that was multicultural. But I believe very much in what I call imprecatory prayers. And I've joined hands with Brother Elmore and Brother McCurry, and the three of us are praying imprecatorily constantly that will be stopped. And I'll be honest with you, I don't care how it's stopped. I'd rather have a dead granddaughter unmarried in heaven and in the kingdom than to have one that did the wrong thing and didn't make it. We've got to get serious about that part. And you can't send your kids to the public school that is multicultural. You can't send them to a church that's multicultural. And you can't take them to places where they're going to fall in love with their little children. You know, one of the things I hate to hear, and I know it's just me. My wife says I'm too strong on this. But I hate when they bring out a little baby, black baby, and women go, oh, he's so cute. As far as I'm concerned, all babies, including mine, were ugly. Thank God I'm not a mother. If I don't even think my own babies are cute, I certainly don't think the others are. We let our emotions sway our mind way too many oftentimes. We're done tonight, and I want you to think about what I said tonight. And this will be published in my mailings, and it'll have all the proof text, it'll have all the verses, it'll have all the Greek and Hebrew words. It'll be sent out in mailings eventually. If you're not on my mailing list and you want it, there's no charge. I mean, I don't charge people. If you get something out of it, I will say this, and I would say this for Brother Barley or anybody else. If you sign up on a mailing list and you receive stuff every month for 12 months, and you never say I love it, or say something positive, or you never send an offering, don't get upset if I take you off after 12 months. I figure you're wasting my money. I don't mind sending it, even if you don't have any money. If you write me and say, well, I love that one, could I have another copy of that one passed out to my daughter or my neighbor? I have a lot of people who will order 5 or 10 of everything I send out, and they pass it out. But it's not fair for you to sign up for somebody's mailing list and never intend to do anything. And I'm not saying that you have to send them money, I'm not even saying that. But you at least ought to write them a letter once in a while and say, you know, that was really a good article, or that was a bad article, or I learned a lot. That's what we do it for. If we're not doing that successfully, we might as well quit. But if you want this particular, I only gave you about 80% of what I had written down. But I've got it all there if you want to go back and sign up on my newsletter or give her the name or whatever. Or email. What's that? Oh, the email's on the pen.